Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. May He protect us. May He sustain us. May we grow in strength together. May our study together be fruitful. And may we not hate one another. Om, peace, peace, peace. So good evening. Welcome to the class. We're in chapter 3 of part 2, the final chapter of the book, and getting very near the end of the Katha Upanishad. So first I'll read the verses we've covered already, and then we'll continue. So this world is like a big banyan tree that is rooted high above in Brahman and has its branches, such as men and women, animals, insects, and plants, spread out below. Yet the phenomenal world is timeless in the sense that it comes and goes again and again like waves, in other words, in cycles. And the root of this tree is Brahman. It is pure, and they say immortal. All the worlds, including this planet, rest on it. Nothing can surpass it. This truly is that self that Nachiketa was asking about. Whatever is in this world has come from prana. In other words, Brahman associated with Maya, its own power. Again, in prana, all this rests and functions. This Brahman is like a thunderbolt about to strike. It is a great terror. Those who know this Brahman become immortal. From fear of it, Brahman, fire gives heat. Out of terror, the sun shines. Afraid of it, Indra, Vayu, and the fifth death rush to perform their respective duties. If anyone is able to attain the knowledge of Brahman before death, he gets liberation in this very life. Otherwise, he is born again and again in this world and other worlds. Just as a clear reflection is seen in a clear mirror, so the self is seen in a pure mind. In the world of the ancestors, you see yourself hazily, as you see things in a dream. In the world of the Gandharvas, you see the self as you see a reflection in water. In other words, again, hazily. But when you see yourself in the world of Brahma, you see it as clearly as you see light and shade. The sense organs have a separate origin in that they are products of the elements. They are active when an individual is awake. They are idle when he is asleep. A truly wise person knows that the self is independent of the sense organs, and he is therefore no longer susceptible to sorrow. The mind is superior to the sense organs. The intellect is superior to the mind. Superior to the intellect is the great self, Hiranyagarbha. Superior to the great self is the unmanifest, Avyakta. The Purusha, the cosmic self, or Brahman, is all-pervasive and formless. So there is no way of knowing it. If anyone knows it, he is liberated from the cycle of birth and death, and attains immortality, even when he is alive. So that's the first 8 verses which we had covered. Now we come to verse 9. So the cosmic self, Purusha, is not an object of our vision. No one can see it by his eyes or perceive it by any other sense organ. It reveals itself in the heart only when the mind is pure and constantly thinks of it. Having realized it properly, one becomes immortal. So the cosmic self, referred to in the last verse, is not perceived by the senses. No one can see it or experience it by any sense organ. It reveals itself in the heart when there is great concentration of the mind and when the mind is also pure. Discarding everything else as a hindrance, the intellect directs the mind to the self. The mind attains one-pointedness, and then the self, which is always within, reveals itself. This revelation takes place independent of the sense organs. When the clouds move away, the sun reveals itself. It is like that. Our desires are the clouds that hide the self. By practicing discrimination and constantly thinking of the self, our desires are dispelled. The mind is then like a clean mirror, and the self is seen as you see yourself in that mirror. So as we had discussed last week, the idea is that the self, the ultimate reality, what they call the true self, is that consciousness which has now become connected with body and mind and forgets what it is. And as body and mind, we spend all our time seeing the outside world, interacting with it, and trying to get things in it. We look out and we say, well, this looks good or that looks good, and we try to grab hold of it, and we hope to get money, or we hope to get love, or we hope to get, fame or something else. But as human beings, we're always kind of involved in the outside world, which is produced by the senses, and in the process of doing that, we lose sight, our memory of the fact that actually God in all His glory is right there within us. And the example is that you can, somebody can be standing right behind you, but you don't see him because you're looking in the other direction. So God is like that. He's this close to us. He's closer than anything in the universe, but we don't see him because all our attention is focused somewhere else. And so this tendency to be always involved in the world, always trying to find some enjoyment, some satisfaction, or in the world is called prayas, the path of the pleasant. And this was mentioned in the very first instruction that Yama gave, is that these two paths are there before man. Prayas, the path of the pleasant, and Shreyas, the path of the good. So in prayas, a person seeks to get things from outside, to make himself better, to make himself richer, to make himself more important in society, to find satisfaction, to find pleasure, all these things. He's constantly looking outside and trying to find something that will make him happier and more powerful and so forth. And because of that, he becomes deluded. He doesn't realize that divinity is there where he's at, and so he spends all his time kind of running around from one experience to another. And even after this life, he then continues more or less in the same state of consciousness, and eventually is drawn back to be reborn again. So he can experience. Right now, we're limited in what we can do because of the body's here. The body's there, certain conditions are there, and so we're kind of limited in what we want to do. But when we're free of this body, then the mind, the subtle mind, the subtle body, still has desires, still has things it wants to do, but now it can fulfill those desires. It can pick a body, pick a new birth where it can express what its desires are inside. So it's like, for example, the person who wants to be a basketball player. He watches the Chicago Bulls, and all his life he plays basketball, and all his life he wants to be a basketball player, but he's only about 5 feet tall. So then it's kind of hopeless. Or somebody wants to be a concert pianist, so he's got real thick fingers, so he can never do it. But when he's free of this body and free of the conditions of this particular birth, now he's free. Oh, now I can do this. I can choose conditions where I can express these desires. And because of this, the ordinary soul, it goes from birth to birth, from life to life, always seeking something, always seeking to find some kind of satisfaction or happiness. And this is called, samsara, the cycle of birth and death. And like this, the soul is always, but deep down, there's a sense in it that something's missing. And what it's looking for is the thing that is missing. And it's thinking, if I can get this thing here, or I can get this relationship here, or have this thing here, then that will fill this kind of void, this lack inside. And so they try one thing after another. They try to make a lot of money, but then when they make the money, they find it didn't bring the happiness, the satisfaction that they thought. And like that, everybody in this world is kind of searching. But now on the path of Shreyas, the path of the pleasant, or the good, instead of spending all your time involved trying to find something outside that'll make you happy, that'll bring this satisfaction, a person begins to look within, begins to search within, begins to ask, well, who am I? What is the truth? What is God? How can I actually experience God. As these ideas come, then the attention tends to be withdrawn from what's going on in the outside world and begins to become an inner search. And it's in this inner search, this is where the person begins to find what he's lacking. We're thinking this particular object in the world, if I get this, this will make me happy. And then most of the time we're disappointed. But if we find the happiness within, we discover, oh, it's there already. That happiness is a real, and it's with us, and it stays with us, and it gives us peace and satisfaction, and slowly we're moving back to get reunited with God. So this is kind of the difference between spiritual life and ordinary life. Now, in the as Swami Vivekananda said, that all of us, every person, we are three different beings simultaneously. At all times, we're three different beings. One is the physical being, where consciousness is based on the idea that I'm a body, and I'm experiencing whatever the body experiences. There's a mental state of consciousness, where the sense is that I'm mostly the mind. You know, the body's there, objects are there, the outside world is there, but it's my mind, my intellect, my knowledge and beauty and inspiration that I find within my mind. This is where my real focus is. And so a person becomes more mental than physical. And this is like the scholars and scientists and artists and musicians, people like that. It's their inner nature that is real, is where they really live their life. And then the outside is kind of secondary. But the third level, as Swami Vivekananda says, is that we're the Atman, we're the spirit, we're the self that is talking about here, which is immortal, blissful, is the actual embodiment of God himself, of Brahman itself. And that self is omnipotent, omniscient, all good, all loving, everything you can imagine, to an infinite degree, is there in that kind of real self. And so, as we mentioned that in our classes which we used to do on the meditation, that really what spiritual life means, what meditation and practices and things like that mean, is trying to achieve a shift in consciousness. When all of our attention is at the physical level, then our consciousness, it becomes physical. All we're aware of is what we experience through the senses, what we see and hear and so forth. And it's like now we're in a little small room. All we know is right now, okay, I'm sitting in this room and this is all I know. Now when we shift our consciousness from that very small kind of physical existence of just what we eat, what we sleep, and watch TV and things like that, then you discover, you open up the world of the mind and the intellect. And suddenly, instead of leading this very small, very confined life of just what happens to me today, as I go through my day-to-day, your mind is full of an awareness of all kinds of things, history and art and poetry and science and all kinds of things are there that make your world much vaster than the person who's just ignorant and just totally physical. So your consciousness then expands. It grows into something much bigger than when you were just, at the physical level. And then finally, you come to the spiritual level where you find the presence of God. And now your consciousness becomes God consciousness. And this is the goal of all the spiritual life, is to have God be an actual experience. Something you're actually aware of, something that is actually a part of your life. But it depends on where you're putting your attention. All three of these levels of consciousness are there all the time, including the divine level. It's there with us all the time. But what we experience in actual fact depends on where we're putting our attention. When our attention is on the external, on the physical, our consciousness then is totally absorbed in the physical and not aware of anything else. Mind is there, but it's kind of just in the background. Mostly we're concerned with supper and things like that. When we shift our consciousness to the mental, then we're mostly aware of the mental, and then the physical. It kind of goes into the background. It's there, but we're not really, concerned with it. And then finally, when we shift our attention to the inner divine presence, that becomes the reality. And we realize that's something much vaster, much bigger than mind or intellect or anything else. All those things become very kind of dry when you've tasted or touched the reality of God. St. Thomas of Aquinas, he was the greatest theologian in the Catholic Church. He wrote the Summa Theologica, which is kind of the foundation of Catholic theology. But towards the end of his life, he stopped writing his book. He stopped working on it. And his secretary asked him, why wasn't he working anymore? Why wasn't he writing anymore? And he said, well, you see, I've had a spiritual experience, and now all this seems like so much straw. Just all these intellectual things. To have a kind of a theory about God is one thing. To have an actual experience of God is something totally different. And the only way you can know God is through that experience, through that direct experience. You can study all the scriptures, you can know everything. You can be the most erudite theologian in the world, and you won't have any idea of what God is, because you haven't experienced it. And so, but the person who's had even a little bit of experience, he knows. And with that knowing also comes a tremendous sense of, everything is fine, everything is good. Well, I was thinking, it's all right here, and now I'm just totally fulfilled. One place, Swami Vivekananda said that even the person who's seen a ghost is better than a theologian, because at least the person who's seen a ghost, he knows, there's something there. I experienced something. I know there's something beyond this world because I experienced it. Whereas the theologian is all just theory, all kind of intellectual ideas and so forth. So this is the idea, is that the whole purpose of our life, whether we know it or not, is to come back into that direct realization of the presence of God. And it's helpful to remember that that presence is always there. It never leaves us for a moment. It never, we can never lose it. It can never be gone from our life, but we can be unaware of it. And he used the example like the sun. The sun is always shining, but there can be clouds that come, and then everything becomes dark and gloomy. In the same way, our mind can create clouds of gloom, clouds of misery, clouds of disbelief and so forth that completely block out the light. And so then we live in almost total darkness, total spiritual darkness. All your spiritual practices, meditation, things like that, they're not done in order to get God, in order to kind of acquire God, like you work for money, but rather to remove the barriers, the clouds that are there, preventing you from being aware of God. And as soon as you're aware, you realize, this is always there. It's always, it's what I am. It's the reality of who I am. It's the reality of the universe. It's the truth of things that can never be lost and never be destroyed or in any way taken from us, but we can be unaware of it. All of our problems stem out of one thing, and that's called ajnana, ignorance. It's there, everything we could possibly want. And those who have had some experience, they say that the joy and the pleasure and things that come out of even a very small amount of spiritual experience are much vaster than anything we can even dream of. If we were to try to imagine what could be the very best thing I could get, I could have $1 billion, I could have this, I could have that. If we could imagine the most wonderful things that could happen to us, is not even a grain of sand compared to what unfolds from the spiritual level as that begins to enter into our life. And when they talk about renunciation and things like that, the idea is that as long as you're holding on to something else, you're not aware of that. As long as your consciousness is absorbed in other things, then you're not aware of this presence within, and so you have to spend some time kind of letting go of all of that, and then of its own self, it will open up. It will come because it's there, it just has to be kind of unblocked. You know, Sri Krishna said that the breeze of God's grace is always blowing, but we have to unfurl our sail. You know, we have to do a certain amount of work at the beginning, when we're struggling with the mind and so forth, purifying the mind. And this is, in the most spiritual practice, this is what you're trying to do, is gradually purify the mind. When the mind and when the personality is based on selfishness and on kind of our own personal desires and ambitions and ego, then there's no room for God there. And so gradually you have to kind of remove all that, clear all that out, so that then the presence of God, which is there, can be felt. Normally we know things through the mind and the intellect. And I think we mentioned last week how the mind in it is like a mirror. And he uses that example here. It's like a mirror. Now, if the mirror is completely covered with dirt, you can't see anything at all. You're not aware that there's any light or anything. You just see the dirt-covered mirror. And so when the mind is filled with all kinds of personal desires and all kinds of negative qualities, things like that, then you're not aware of anything. You don't see any light at all. So you have to gradually purify the mind, clean the mirror, and as you clean the mirror, you start to see a reflection in it. You start to sense there is something there. There is some light there. And the cleaner the mirror gets, the clearer the perception is, until you reach a point where it dawns on you. You awaken. You say, oh, this is it. It's here. And then there's this shift in consciousness. And suddenly, rather than being a human being, being a body, or even being the human mind, suddenly you're it. It's there. And so that is kind of what you're trying to do as you meditate and practice and so on. So as he said in the commentary, he says that when the clouds move away, the sun reveals itself. So it's like that. Our desires are the clouds that hide the self. By practicing discrimination and constantly thinking of the self, our desires are dispelled. The mind is then like a clean mirror, and the self is seen as you see yourself in that mirror. So as the mind gets cleaned, as the desires and all the things that draw us away from our own inner self, as those things are removed, gradually this shift comes. But we need to remember that no matter whether the mirror is dirty or clean, it has no effect on the sun. In other words, the sun is there, the sun is always shining. It's only the reflection in the mirror that is affected by its condition, whether it's dirty or whether it's clean. But the sun itself is there, and that sun is what we are. We're not actually the reflection in the mirror, but it's only by getting some sense of what it is that we can eventually realize that, oh, this is where it's at. So then verse 10 says that when the 5 organs of perception stop working, having merged with the mind, and the intellect too has retired from its work, that is a state scholars describe as being the highest spiritual state. So here's the state anyone practicing yoga will try to attain. He will turn his organs of perception inward and make them merge with the mind. He will also give the intellect complete rest. This is described by the yogins as the highest spiritual state. You know, as we're a body, as we mentioned, and we're a mind, and the mind has 2 levels. One is called manas, and this is an area of the mind which kind of circulates memories and feelings and opinions and things like that. Is kind of always kind of churning up different things, ideas and things out of the subconscious. But it doesn't kind of know the truth. It forms an opinion, but it doesn't actually know. So that one minute we're saying, oh yes, I should do this, but the next one is, no, I'll do that. And like that, the mind is always constantly changing and so forth. This is called manas. A deeper level of the mind is called the buddhi, or the intellect. And this is the part which has a sense of, okay, this is what's true. This is right, this is wrong, this is what I'm going to do. It's the part that can truly kind of make decisions and be confident in those decisions. When we're working primarily at the manas level, we may make a decision, but then at the same time, part of us is doubting it, saying, well, maybe I should have done something else, maybe I should have done that. The person who's been somewhat connected with the buddhi, he's certain, he does, okay, we do this. And this was when I first came to Chicago with Swami Varadananda. This is one of the first things that impressed me about him, was he had a tremendous capacity to make decisions. We had all this construction going on at Ganges, and all kinds of crises, and all kinds of things would come, but right away he'd say, okay, do this. And invariably, whatever he said, that's the way it would work out. So that level of our consciousness is called the buddhi, or the intellect, and it's a higher level than the mind, which is just kind of circulates impressions and feelings and different things like that. Deeper than the buddhi is what's called ahamkara, the ego. There's deeper than the intellect, there's something there that says, this is me, I'm this person here, I'm this kind of consciousness here. And I'm the one that's experiencing all these different things. And then they say, after you get beyond ahamkara, beyond this sense of ego, that I'm this person who's in charge of all these different instruments, okay, then you go into the Hiranyagarbha, into the cosmic ego. A person can go, when that sense of, I'm this individual self here, I'm this particular self here, this particular point of consciousness, when he transcends that, then he realizes I'm the consciousness of the whole universe. And that's called Hiranyagarbha. Then higher than that is what they call the unmanifest, avyakta. And these were all mentioned, I think, in the previous verse. Yeah, this is in the commentary on verse 8. That said, the Purusha, or cosmic self, or Brahman, is all-pervasive and formless, so there is no way of knowing it. If anyone knows it, he is liberated from the cycle of birth and death, and attains immortality, even when he is alive. So it says that the Purusha, or spirit, is all-pervasive. Even space derives itself from it. And as it is formless, there is no way of knowing it. It is beyond thought and speech, and beyond the senses. The unmanifest is Brahman, associated with Maya, but without manifestation. When manifestation takes place, it is Hiranyagarbha, or the cosmic self. So from the gross to the fine, this is how we progress. At first, the gross body and its organs appear to be the reality. But the mind is finer than the body and its organs, as we find that the mind controls the body and the organs. Finer than the mind is the intellect. It controls the mind. Still finer is the individual self, which controls the intellect. Then finer than the individual self is Hiranyagarbha, the cosmic intellect, the first manifestation of the self, or Brahman. And still finer is the unmanifest, avyakta, which is also called Maya, or Prakriti. The finest is the Purusha, the cosmic self, Paramatman, Parabrahman, the Absolute. So you go from physical, the most limited, the grossest and the most limited form level, you go and you discover that beyond just physical sensations, which is a person who's totally physical, is living basically an animal life. There's no thought, there's no understanding, there's nothing, it's just physical sensations come, which is what the body does. But then, deeper than that is the manas, is the mind, which is kind of all these things are feeding into, and then it understands that, okay, sees a chair, and it says, oh yeah, I've seen a chair before, so I know, okay, that's a chair. Then deeper than that is the buddhi, or the intellect, and deeper than the intellect is this ahankara, this individual self, which says, and that individual self, it's immortal. Ahamkara. The body, it lives for a few years and it goes. And along with it, the mind that's associated with it also goes, but there's a more subtle mind, conscious, that continues on, even after the body's gone. But anyway, but deeper than all those is the ahamkara, and then it's the soul, it's the jiva, the individual soul, and it goes from birth to birth, from all different experiences and so forth. And then, but deeper than the ahamkara, the ego, the individual consciousness, even though it's immortal, deeper than that individual consciousness is the hiranyagarbha, which is the cosmic mind, the whole universe. That's what, are all, everything. It's like ideas within the one cosmic mind. And consciousness, as it gets finer, as it goes beyond individuality or separation, it becomes one with everything. Deeper than that is what they call the avyakta, the unmanifest. It's beyond the God's power, cosmic mind creating this universe. You have the kind of presence of God, the consciousness of God, which then expresses itself through the cosmic mind. But that's something kind of deeper than even this universe itself. It's like this whole universe. This whole life is actually considered like a little drop in the ocean of Brahman. And so deeper than in even the avyakta, the unmanifest, is Brahman itself, which is indescribable, which is in a whole different kind of level of reality. But it's all based on consciousness. Whatever your consciousness is connected with, that's what you tend to become. So when it's at the gross level, at the physical level, it becomes physical. When it's at the mental level, it becomes mental or intellectual. When it gets to the ahamkara level, that is individual kind of spiritual consciousness, the immortal consciousness. Then it goes to the hiranyagarbha, the whole unit, and then ultimately to Brahman. And so it's by when we are involved kind of all the time with the outside world, that consciousness is always pushing outside and going towards the kind of grosser levels of experience. In meditation, we're trying to kind of reverse that process and try to go back to the source of things. And the more we move to the source of things, the more we unfold that divinity which is there within us. And the big obstacle to unfolding it is the ego. Now what the ego is a sense that I am something separate and different from God. I'm different from God, I'm different from everybody else, I'm different from the universe, I'm this particular person here. And that ego may be centered on the body, on this particular body, and that's all I'm concerned with what's happening to this body. It may also be involved with the mind. A person can be a great intellectual and still be extremely vain. We see this when you look at the lives of great writers or great, even scientists. They can be very kind of vain about their reputation and very sensitive and so forth. That I'm the most important person in the room. That kind of attitude. But when a person begins to surrender ego, then his real self starts to be able to come in, and that real self is ultimately the self in all. So this idea, instead of pushing ourselves forward, instead of trying to grab things for ourselves, instead of trying to push other people out of the way, this gradual sense of just being in harmony with things, and a general well-wishing towards everybody. One important thing, a very important thing that happens as a person, because even in a small way, and by this we're talking like very high things, and you think, oh, I can never reach that, but even in the smallest little bit of it, the smallest little kind of step in that direction will bring benefits. And for most people, this is kind of a gradual kind of unfolding of it. But anyway, that as we get even a little bit of establishment in spiritual consciousness, in a little bit of a sense of the presence of God, we begin to realize that we don't need anything else. We don't need anything from the world. We don't need money, we don't need fame, we don't, all these things that we were desiring before and chasing after and fighting with other people to get, all of these things don't matter because we found something much better. And so this then puts us in harmony with everybody else, with the rest of the world. That when we realize that we don't need anything from anybody, we don't even need kind of emotional satisfaction from anybody else, then we find our relationships would tend to become much more harmonious. When you need something from somebody else, it may be you're looking for money, like a panhandler. You're asking them for money, or maybe very often it's emotional, and this is particularly in relationships. You're depending on the other person to somehow give you some emotional satisfaction or pleasure. But always when you're trying to get something from somebody else, they sense it. And it puts up, perhaps subconsciously, but it puts up defensive barriers. That there's a sense of kind of holding the person away because he says he's trying to get something, take something from me. And I said it can be, even in couples, it can be a very kind of subtle emotional thing, but still it's felt. And it creates a barrier. But when you feel that I don't need anything from you, and I'm just glad to share, whatever I got, I'm glad to share with you, then that sense of separation, those barriers, they aren't there anymore, and your whole life tends to become harmonious. Because it's based on you being happy yourself, finding that don't need anything or anybody for anything, because God is here. God is here, God is my mother, God is my father, God is closer to me than anybody else, and loves me more than anybody else. Once you've got a sense of that, then you're no longer a threat. And so your relationship in the world, instead of being kind of stressful and strained and a struggle, it gradually just smooths out. And you find that as you begin to develop this attitude of surrender to God and of connection to God, of a presence there with you, that it gradually, your deeper self, your deeper spirit, it gradually begins to operate through you. See, the body, the mind, all these things, these are fine as instruments. That's what they're meant to be. Through this body, we're able to be in the world. We're able to experience it. We're able to do things in the world, accomplish some things in the world. And like that, it's very good. But the problem is that the instruments have taken over, and we've lost control of them. So as you begin to sense this presence of God, then your soul, your deeper self, it can begin to start to function in your life. And then you find that spontaneously, without effort, without racking your brains, without struggling, spontaneously you find that you just will do what needs to be done, say what needs to be said, say the right words, and just without anxiety or worry or what should I do, it's just okay. Situation comes and you respond to it. And the response is just automatic almost. It's not something that you have figured out in your mind what I should do or how I should handle this situation. It just happens. And this is Because ultimately, one of the ideas is that you're not the doer. The ego thinks it's the doer, and this is what gets us in trouble. We say, I'm the doer, and I've got so much education, I've got so much wisdom, I'm smarter than anybody else, and so I can do this. And that ego is there, and it's always trying to manipulate things and solve problems and deal with things. But when the higher self, your deeper self begins to function, then it handles everything easily. Everything just unfolds. And this is what life becomes. Gradually, he said, you become just kind of a witness, watching the world unfold, watching life come, and realizing that you don't have to do anything. You just sit and watch it, and everything begins to take place on its own. And so this is this shift in consciousness. So gradually, as it's gradually achieved or gradually experienced, it then transforms our whole experience. And as I think I mentioned before, that when you talk about spiritual knowledge or something, what actually happens is not that you get new facts or new theories or new ideas about God or the world or anything else, but that your state of consciousness changes, becomes transformed. And so the same person you were before, the same world you were in before, is there, but now you see it differently. And that, it transforms everything. If we were seeing correctly, we would see everything as God. Everything is the sacred manifestation of God. But because we don't see things correctly, because we've kind of created all these clouds in the mind, we don't see it that way. And for some people, they live in the most terrible kind of state of consciousness, full of fear, full of misery, full of all kinds of negative things, full of violence and harm. All these things are there out of ignorance. When the ignorance is clear, then that same world that you experienced before begins to become transformed into something else. And it begins to show its own natural divinity that's there. And both in physical world and people, everything else, everything becomes filled with divinity. And so there's no when you have the right spiritual consciousness, everything is spiritual. If the spiritual consciousness isn't there, then it depends on whatever your state of mind is. Hey, you can be a kind of a happy person, or you can be a very totally miserable person, but you're not seeing the reality. You're not seeing what's actually there. And so, as we kind of move towards spiritually, you're actually, like I say, you're changing the state of your consciousness. Normally we try to fix all of our problems, all the things that we're not satisfied with, all the things we're worried with. We try to fix it through the mind or through doing something, through some activity, but all those things, they get fixed when we can become aware of the real self. So according to the yogins, the state in which all the organs are complete rest is yoga. In that state, a yogi never makes a mistake. For instance, he is not attracted by sense pleasures because he is one with the self. But this yogic state may have its fall, just as it has its rise. So this and the preceding verse give a definition of yoga. Yogins say that yoga is that state in which all the organs, including the mind and the intellect, are at complete rest. In that state, a yogin is united with the self, and he is then safe from worldly temptations. But this state may not last long. The yogic state has its end just as it has its beginning. One has to be careful that when the yogic state ends, one is not trapped by the guiles of the world. One has to keep strict watch over one's thoughts and actions. The practice of discriminating between things conducive to spiritual life and things detrimental to it should always be maintained. So there is, through concentration, through in Raja Yoga, through concentration, through and so forth, a person can reach this state of being kind of totally quiet down the mind, the intellect, everything, and being kind of established in a deeper self. But it's that when the person comes out of that meditation, then the mind and everything can come back. But there's a higher state of realization where the person kind of transcends his personal self altogether and becomes aware that, oh, this Atman, spirit, this pure spiritual consciousness, this is the reality. When that's attained, it's like a person has awoken from a dream. One minute you're asleep, and the next minute you're awake. Now when you're awake, you don't have to struggle not to dream. It's just, you're awake now. And so, in other words, a yogi, as long as we're seeking God, we're kind of within the dream. As long as you have a sense, I'm this person, I'm this individual, and I'm seeking God, that search will bring us to higher and higher kind of experiences and so forth, but it's still within the dream. But then, and this comes mostly through the grace of God, it's not something that we do ourselves, but at some point, there comes this awakening, this shift, and then the person realizes that that human being, that's not me at all. I have nothing to do with that. I'm completely something different. I'm, in other words, the dream of this human life that we're in now, that dream is just seen. Oh, that was a dream, and now I'm awake. And so when a person reaches that kind of awakening, then he doesn't lose it again. Like I said, when you through control of the mind, through restraint of the senses, things like that, you can reach this point where for the time being, you're established. So that in your own inner consciousness, you're not being drawn out into experiences, but still, when that experience ends, you can come back to the world. But when a person becomes awakened or realized, then he knows. This is reality. Spirit. This is reality. I am spirit. And I'm not a human being. I'm not physical. I've never been any of that. And so none of that has any effect on me. And so this is kind of the higher level of awakening. And that, once a person attains that, whatever state he's in, whatever he's doing, whatever activity is going on, whether he's meditating within or whether he's in the world acting, he's always divine. He's always spiritual, because that's the reality of what he is. So in the yoga, the Raja Yoga, they can, through concentration and like this deep concentration, inner focus, they gradually get drawn deeper within, but as long as there's an individual there that's saying, I'm in this world, I may be in heaven, I may be in some subtle realm, but I'm in this world, and I'm struggling with it and so forth, then you're still within the dream. When you attain the knowledge of Brahman, or become one with Brahman, then you're kind of out of the dream. You see the dream as a dream, but you know I'm not there. So we are almost at the end of this. I think it's about 17 verses or something here. Let's see. 18 verses altogether. And then we'll be done with the Katha Upanishad. So any questions on any of this? Because this kind of explored all the way from here all the way up to the top. So it's kind of... But the important thing to remember is that in essence we can never, divinity is there, is something that can never be lost, because it's the reality of what we are. No matter how many dreams you have, every night you go to sleep, you have a dream, and some of the dreams may be pleasant, some of them may be terrible nightmares. No matter what kind of experiences we have, it's all like dreams, experiences that come and go, but the reality is something completely different. And that is never in any way affected by what goes on in the dream. A person can do the most terrible things, but if he realizes, oh, this is it, if he wakes up in the dream, right away he becomes a sage. He becomes a saint because now it has nothing to do with what he was doing in the dream. But that's kind of the culmination of things. When you haven't reached that culmination and you do terrible things, then terrible reactions come to you. And you suffer from those reactions. You get sent to jail, or things happen, and so you suffer from all those things. So it's only the awakened sage, but like I said, anybody, as soon as you awaken, in other words, right now, as long as he says, okay, I'm an individual, we may have a little higher idea that, okay, I'm not just an individual body, I'm an individual mind or an individual soul, but as long as we have the sense that I'm an individual and that I am the doer of things, I'm making things happen, and that I'm experiencing things happen to me, then we can have a sense that I am making progress. I'm going in the right direction. I'm experiencing more happiness, more bliss, more presence of God. I'm beginning to experience in my life. Or we can go the other direction and say, I'm going deeper and deeper into darkness, becoming more and more negative, more and more material. Now, as long as that individual sense is there, then we can go up, but we can also go down. And we find sometimes the mind will go up very high, and then it'll crash down. As a matter of fact, it's the nature of the mind to go up and down, to kind of work in waves. And when a person is on the spiritual path, you shouldn't become disheartened, because one day you have a very wonderful meditation, and the next day, nothing at all. Because this is just the way the mind kind of operates. But as long, in other words, as an individual, we can do good and experience wonderful things, and great deal of happiness and so forth. Or, like I said, we can become completely negative. We can go through terrible experiences. But in neither case, whether we're a saint or we're a sinner, in neither case are we a realized soul. On the other hand, a realized soul, once he says, oh, this is the reality, this is God, I'm not that individual, separate individual, no, then he's fully realized, and now he's a sage, and now he knows the truth, he is the truth. But it comes only when he realizes that I'm not that dream person, I'm not that person there, I'm awake. And so then everything that character in the dream did, good or bad, everything is kind of gone. That character in the dream, it may still experience its karma. It may have good things can happen to it. It may have bad things happen to it. But the realized soul, it doesn't have any effect on him. He's not there anymore. Yeah. And so this is ultimately kind of where we go. We can, as souls, we're immortal, and we can go through endless dreams, all kinds of dreams, very good dreams and so forth. But eventually, the truth, the ultimate reality is that all these dreams, they're dreams. But underlying the dream is something that's very wonderful. Underlying the dream, we discover that we are the children of immortal bliss. That we're children of God, we're one with God, and it's God's Divine Mother's kind of power that's bringing us. Okay, you want to play here? Okay, here's your game. And so, like that, the Divine Mother allows us to, gives us all these experiences. But when you become realized, then you know the Mother herself. You know, oh, what's actually here? Who's here? And you realize that this is something much more wonderful, something closer than anything you've experienced. So like I said, we're almost getting to the end here, where it only goes up to about verse 18. So then, and things are about to get very hectic. As you probably know by now, we're having this Chicago Calling program, and it's coming up starting next week. We have over 50 monks and nuns coming in and devotees from around the world. On the 8th, there's going to be a monastic conference at Ganges, so everybody go up there and they'll have it kind of a monastic conference. And if devotees go up, there'll be some bhajans or pujas or things, but the meetings are actually private kind of. Then in the evening, though, on the 8th, they come back here. There'll be a program over at the Hindu temple. Start about 6 o'clock and go. There'll be some talks and honoring the monastics and some little programs, and then meal will be served. But then on the 9th and 10th, these are the two main programs which will be held at the Hilton Chicago, in downtown Chicago, 720 South Michigan Avenue. And the first, on the 9th, will be the International Devotees Conference, and on the 10th will be the kind of remembrance of the 120th, because this is the 150th anniversary of Swami Vivekananda's birth. It's also the 120th anniversary of the Parliament of Religions. So the program on the 10th will be kind of more of an interfaith program, remembering the Parliament of Religions. And then on the 11th, there'll be a bus tour of places connected with Swami Vivekananda. So, but we're going to have a huge number of swamis and nuns and foreign devotees and devotees from all over the country coming in for all this, plus local people too. So all that. So next week there won't be any class on Friday, and I think Swami Varadananda, he'll do the Tuesday class, but there won't be any Friday class. There won't be any Sunday service because everything will be at Chicago County. And so all that's coming up. Om Asato Ma Sadgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityormam Amritam Gamaya. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. O Lord, lead us from the unreal to the real. Lead us from darkness to light, and lead us from death to immortality. O peace,